Welcome to something else entirely, where we center the weird so we may grow stronger in spirit.
Welcome back, my friends. Today on the show, I have my dear friend Ilana. She will be talking about her experience with dreaming, lucid dreaming, precognitive dreaming, and what she views as the benefits of meditation in the way that we show up for our world, ourselves, and our connection to spirit. So please enjoy this conversation with my dear friend, Ilana Robbins-Gross.
There we go. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
It's really good to see your face.
Yeah, it's really good to see yours too. And your very long hair.
Yes, and my very long hair. Yeah, so thank you for making the time to be here. And in the spirit of what we're doing here, actually, you know what? I don't want to do that. I want to just talk to you. I don't want to
Okay.
do that. So, for the people listening, this is my friend Ilana, and we have been friends now. Ilana Robbins Gross. We have been friends now for 11
Yeah.
years. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. August 2014.
14. Yep. And I'm going to just open by telling that story because it's too good. The synchronicities and the cuteness of it. So in 2014, I had just moved to California to work at San Francisco State and had never been to Burning Man before. And some friends, do you remember how it went? Who knew? Somebody knew. Somehow we were connected through mutual people.
Yes, I do know. So I had gone to college with Paul, and you had known his brother Anthony
Hmm.
from grad school, I think.
Yes, thank you. Good job.
You're welcome.
Your memory's more intact than mine, clearly. Anyway, and so yeah, I drove in the middle of the night to pick up this person I had never met in Oakland and just pulled up to the curb on the side of the street in my Pontiac Grand Am. I believe that was the car I had at the time. And Alana was on the curb. It was like 11 p.m. or midnight or something.
Yeah, it was late at night. And I had only moved to California maybe like 4 months before or something like that. I had also never been to Burning Man before.
Yes. And so yeah, I picked up this total stranger and then we drove through the night for many hours. And yeah, it was and
Uh,
here we are 11 years later. So,
I feel like it's like we drove 200 hours through the desert to the middle of nowhere, and we stopped along the way and we ate at Denny's.
oh, yes. And I've learned so much from you in those 11 years, and I'm
And I
very
from you.
grateful. Mm. And what I would like to learn more about from you today is I very rarely remember my dreams. But as I have been taking my graduate level courses in post-materialism and reading and learning about all these things, um, I've come to understand a lot more about space-time reality and that at least current physics would suggest that the kind of space-time reality we move through is an illusion. And so I was talking to Ilana about this actually the other day, and you said you have very vivid dreams. And so I was curious to hear more about those because I'm sure I dream, but I don't retain any information.
Um, Maybe for better and maybe for worse, Annie.
Yeah, yeah, right.
But yes, so I would say to share a little bit about my experience dreaming. So I tend to have very vivid dreams and have my entire life. I often remember them. They will fade over the course of the day, but not
Mhm.
always. And I think there are a few things I want to mention. One is that I often have recurring dreams. So I have like similar dreams that I will come back to and sort of can remember and live in that. I
Mm-hmm.
have dreams that I think of as sort of more uh in my mind I call them prophetic dreams, but I feel like that is maybe a questionable way to call it. But it's
Well, actually, if I may,
please,
because we're just going to make this a conversation, so I'm
yeah,
going to interrupt you like I would normally.
please.
Um, I think some of our words have gotten a little twisted where it's like prophetic has only biblical meaning and therefore is tied with all of these or associated with all of these religious ideologies that are based in fear and control and stuff. And so I just want to encourage you and the listeners, let's see how it
Yeah.
feels if we all start using those words again in what they truly mean. Like anyone can have access to prophetic information. It doesn't mean you are special or I am special or anyone is supreme over anyone else. Anyway, continue.
Yeah.
Prophetic
And I
dreams.
want to say, I think some of my hesitation about the word is because of the connections and sort of what it draws in people's mind. Like it reminds them of certain things that are not things that I am trying to claim for myself or associations that I'm interested in making. But I think in many ways, for me, it best describes internally my experience in the sense of it's dreaming of things that in a linear timeline have yet to happen. Or I haven't experienced yet, or I have no like
Hmm.
right, I haven't gone through it yet. So this has
Hmm.
been happening my entire life. And actually, before I share about my prophetic dreams, I think there's one other thing I want to say, which is my dreams have always been very intense. And for a period of time, I actually started taking fish oil, and it activates your brain and sort of help with that. I actually
Hmm.
don't know, I can't remember the exact sort
Oh,
of intended effects, but Annie does,
I
so she
can
can tell
science
us.
on it real quick.
Yeah, please do.
Um, which again, my whole relationship to science has changed dramatically in the last few years. But what we know about fish oil is that the fats that are in that are really good for the myelin sheath. And so you can think of like electrical signals, and the myelin sheath is what's insulating them. And that's kind of this fatty tube around what is sending electrical signals. And so that's why certain fats are supposedly really healthy for brain health, because they help with the insulation and the conduction.
I love that. So anyway, so I was started taking fish oil, and for the 2 months I took it, I stopped after 2 months. I was having lucid dreams every single night, which are really, I don't know if anyone else has had lucid dreams, but they're very intense experiences. And what I found was not necessarily unpleasant, but what I found is I woke up not feeling rested. So at the end of 2 months, I decided to stop taking it because I was just like freaking exhausted. But I share that more to say a little bit about like the intensity of my relationship with dreams and the level at which and sort of the richness and fullness that I dream at and that I often remember my dreams at as well.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you're describing this being exhausted. So as I've been learning more about this with different people who have, it's not my word, but that I've learned that is the most comfortable for me because it doesn't carry any connotations, is this idea of noetic,
Mm,
coming from gnosis, of the knowing that we know deeply that is not through science or right. Maybe sometimes I think intuition can be noetic, but can also get twisted by trauma or stories we've developed over time or whatever. And so this idea that we all have different noetic skills that are not the same from person to person. So some people have more of a proclivity to clairvoyance. Interesting, I just finished a class a couple days ago, and this was published in peer-reviewed scientific journals that they found, I forget if it was 13 or 22. I'm not very good at numbers. It's amazing I made it this far as a somewhere in that range of genes that are distinct between people who are mediums and people who are not.
so interesting.
Yeah, so there, and most people just aren't even aware of this research because it kind of gets, buried in all of the media and science noise. But I thought that was fascinating and gave some, because even if I want to let go of that way of thinking, I can't. It's really in there. And so, for whatever reason, when I hear those kinds of scientific facts, there's a little voice in my head that still says, ah, it is real. even though I've experienced it, and so I
Yeah.
know, not mediumship, but other my own noetic experience, and so I know it is real, but that still just really scratches an itch. And so I would suspect that you have the propensity for the noetic skill of lucid dreaming and what some would call precognition, right? Seeing things before they happen. Would you describe the lucid dream experience a little bit more? Because when we say that, there's some people listening who might know, but there might be other people like, are you awake and able to manipulate things in the dream, or was that
Yes.
like for
So I
you?
have sort of like full choice in many ways over the dream. So I continue to have agency, right? Most often in dreams, I think I'm a sort of like a witness to the world happening around me,
Mhm.
like occasionally you could be like, oh, it would be nice to walk down this path, but really sort of I'm experienced, like, right, like
Mhm.
I'm not an active agent. Like it's something that is experienced on me, not something that I am doing. In lucid dreams, instead, I continue to have agency in them so that I'm able to manipulate and change them. And that can mean many different things, right? It could be like, right, and a lot of times I think dreams are not sort of like these linear stories, right? It's not like reading a novel where it's like this happens and this happens, this happens. It's sort of like maybe it's a visual experience that carries meaning in it or sort of understanding, and then you can like turn the visual experience, right? Think about it as a kaleidoscope. So it's like I'm turning the kaleidoscope and able to look through it and see it in a different way, and like through that, like experience something different or sort of like I'm sorry, like I don't quite have the words for this. This is not something I talk about that often, but there's something about, I think actually something that feels really important for me to say is that I would not necessarily say my dreams are necessarily like tight visual experiences of a storyline that happens. And it's like,
Mhm.
here's the path and now I walk down it. But it is sort of like this visual felt experience that like I know I am walking down this path, even though if I'm not like physically watching myself walking down it. It's a little bit like metaphorical in some ways,
Mhm.
but I understand the experience of it and what that means. So when I'm having a lucid, and sometimes it's more direct and visual and things like that, but a lot of times it's sort of it's coded in it. So when I'm having a lucid dream, it's like I have agency in it. I'm an actor in it, and I get to make choices in ways that I don't in my other dreams. And in some
Mhm.
ways, it's like beautiful and exciting, right? Like you could be like, and now I fly. And in other ways, you're like, ugh, like I have to keep making decisions and choices. And like, I don't get to just like sort of like sit back and be a sort of like I'm a passive participant. And there's a way then I find that when I wake up in the morning after lucid dreaming, which still happens sometimes, excuse me, but not as much as when I was taking the fish oil. Um, that I just don't feel like I got that pause and that rest in the evening.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some people I've been listening to who calling them schools feels a little restrictive, but they're collections of human beings attempting to educate other collections of
Mm.
human beings about these things. And one thing some teachers I've been learning from are describing is the necessity of rest when you're cultivating these skills because our sort of human vessel is not always necessarily ready for that much information to come through. And so if you're not following kind of a gradual, this is why sometimes when people have something resembling a spiritual awakening experience that can get conflated with psychosis. Some of that is societal, but some of it's real because the person really does feel like they're becoming untethered, because if you didn't have the wisdom kind of to stop, that could have led you to be chronically having these dreams and then chronically exhausted. So during your waking state, you're not functioning in this plane of reality. Um, so it's interesting it's fun for me to talk to a real friend and then be like, this is exactly what they are telling me at school.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. And I do think like rest and restoration is so important.
Mm.
We have to be able to hold and sort of like to be enough of a vessel or a space in order to hold these things. It's beautiful, but it's also draining and exhausting. And something that I find interesting is I've spoken about this lucid dream experience with people before, and I often get like, why would you stop? That sounds so cool. And in some ways, like, yes, it really was. And like imagine like you never get to have real sleep, right? Like you're only taking short naps your entire life. It's freaking exhausting. And then you don't have the capacity to be able to process or make meaning of or to integrate and
Integrate.
understand in a way that I think is really important.
Yeah, I really agree. And so my next question is, before we get to like you telling real stories about the dreams themselves, something else I've been hearing from many and my own lived experience. So in my own, which I've shared a little bit about, but not much, but in my own noetic experiences, one of the ways that I know it is distinct from my imagination. So if I'm lost in thought and I'm imagining, I don't know, some future thing or a vacation or whatever, the sort of realness, the felt realness of that imagining feels similar to this reality. But when I have a noetic experience of cosmic consciousness or one of these kinds of things, for me, it feels way more real. It makes this reality feel like two-dimensional TV land. And so I'm wondering, in your lucid dreams, despite the sort of non-linearity of the experience itself, what was the felt sense of like how real it is or how important it is, or does that vary?
Yeah, such a good question. I almost think I have the opposite. It's like if there's something like a little vague about it, but it's like this very small flame that you can't grab onto. You just sort of have to hold it gently in your hand and sort of let it float above it. And so I wouldn't say to me it feels like this more real experience. It feels like a very different, like there's a really different feel to it. But I almost think it's sort of like light and precious and like you can't quite look right at it, right? There's a little bit of this
Hmm.
side look, but I also think part of that is because we are trained to think in such specific ways in our world. And so in order to think differently, right? Like I can only build on what I know, and I am constructing my house on the understanding of knowledge I have in the society I live in and the structures that I've been taught. And so I think in order to be able to feel or look at something very different, it's sort of like the side approach to it. Because if I'm looking at it head on, like I'm getting it's getting blocked by all the other things that I have been told or taught or the structures that are in my life and in this realm and reality that like doesn't have necessarily always make space for that. So it's sort of like side grounds.
Yes. Yeah, I really understand what you're saying. And the one, and in my experience, when I, how do I describe this? When I am attempting to contact those states, I very much experience it as a side eye. And then there have been a few times where it feels more like it has happened to me
Mm,
through no volition of my own and for not very long in terms of length of experience in
yeah.
this time construct. Um, and in
We should probably
those
define
ones,
time, but yes.
yeah, bleh, that's probably, well, some physicists better to do that than me. So I really understand what you're describing viscerally, actually. And it sometimes to me feels mm, foggy, like I can't quite see. And also, interestingly, to your point about the structures and the beliefs, in one of the books I was reading, they were talking about the necessity of belief in certain cases. It's interesting. So there's some instances with different healing practices where it almost works better if you don't believe,
Mm,
because then you're not trying and
yeah,
it can flow. And then there's other instances of different noetic practices where you have to believe you can do it to be able to do it.
yeah,
And so I think in a different life, you probably trained and were sitting in a little hobbit house somewhere, just dishing
yeah.
out precognitive dreams for the masses.
And maybe I'll get back there again too.
We had our plan of retiring on the
The beach.
beach.
Yeah,
on the beach with
absolutely.
yeah.
The knitting and the
So
whittling.
yeah,
There's still
let's not
time.
exactly. That timeline is closer than we might think.
One thing on that sort of like side look definition, like I was also in some of the times the way I think about words and vocabulary and the way, right, as soon as we name, there's a lot of interesting research that I can't call to my mind right now, but it's like as soon as we name something, we've defined it. And now it has sort of these borders and boundaries to it. But before we name it, it's like able to exist in a little bit more sort of free flow, fuzzy edges. And I think for me, a lot of this space is a free flow, fuzzy edge space. And I am hesitant to put a circle around and be like, here's the boundary and here's the border, because I think for me, a lot of this is about non duality and the lack of definition and sort of like more open space. And so I get very hesitant about circumscribing
Mhm.
anything because the excitement's actually in the, oh, you and I, we're not really separate, right? Like we are actually the same and we are, but we're sort of in different instances here, but we're one and the same. And so I think that circumscribing to me often feels like then I'm going back to sort of this more traditional way of thinking that I've been raised, that there's deep value in, and I live in this world and I'm here and I want to live in it well. And also I want to make space for something different too.
Yeah, obviously. So clear in the way you show up. Okay, so with that, would you please tell us?
Prophetic dreams?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Since I was a child, I sometimes dream of things before they happen in a linear timeline. It's like, and it's not the same as deja vu. And I think that feels really important to be clear. Like in my body and the way I experience it's different from deja vu. Deja vu is like, oh, this seems sort of familiar. This is like, oh, I've witnessed this. I've been here. I've done it before. And so when I have these types of dreams,
Noetic is the
yes,
feeling.
exactly.
It's the
Exactly.
feeling you just know,
Yes,
which is different
exactly.
than vague familiarity. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And so sometimes when I have these dreams, I will wake up and it'll be it's not like, next Tuesday this is gonna happen, right? Like it's it's more vague than that. And so sometimes it can be a long time afterwards, right? It's not always tied immediately and I don't know when. But I shared the story with you the other day, but I'll share again. I think for me, the most dramatic experience of this is so I took a gap year between high school and college. Nope, this was a year. I lied. Take that piece out. After I graduated from college, I spent a year working and traveling in South and Central America. And I had a very good friend from school who was in the Peace Corps and living in rural Ecuador. And I mean, like in the middle of the mountains, like wild dogs running around, no street lights. There's one road that you could walk to and you basically like flag or hitchhike to get out of there. This is isolated. And I had this dream uh, before that I had been in this place with her. We started to have
Wait, sorry.
yes, yes.
About how long before?
Oh, I am not great with time, but
Like,
like I would say before I even knew I was going to Ecuador.
so you knew her.
I
I'm just
knew
trying to like
her.
sort through the thing. So
Yes. So I've known her
you
probably
already knew
for
her.
9 years at this time. We did high school and college together. And I probably had this dream about maybe like a year and a half before I went down there. So it was before she went to Ecuador. It was before I knew I was going to travel to South America, but we were already in each other's lives and we're friends.
Mhm.
Okay. And so in my dream, I was staying with her in this place that I had not seen yet, but sort of this rudimentary house. And we got into a conversation about something, and we ended up getting into a fight. It was like one of those unexpected fights with friends where you're like, start talking, and then all of a sudden it sort of like heats up and you realize you're on different sides. We got into this really big fight, and it ended up with me leaving in the middle of the night in rural Ecuador and sort of like being on the side of the road, like in the dark and being like, basically like, well, fuck, like, what am I going to do now? And it was bad, right? So that was the dream that happened. So then I went and I was staying with her and it wasn't like I got
Wait,
there.
sorry,
Yep.
one clarification on the dream.
Yes.
So when you described it, you said that you got in the fight, you ended up leaving this rudimentary house and were abandoned in rural Ecuador. at the time of the dream, did you know it was Ecuador in the dream, or were you just like,
No, it was just like
right,
this
you
like
just knew it
dark,
was a
right.
remote
This I
area?
was in this like very dark space with like dogs barking around me and I couldn't really see them. So yes,
Yeah,
great
that
point.
feels like an important
Yeah.
clarifying question. Yeah.
And I also, to be clear, I'm going to talk about what really happened, but it wasn't like I went to the place and I was like, that's the tree from the dream, right? It's like, oh, I walked out of this house into this dark space with dogs and then this feeling of like, oh, fuck, what am I going to do now? Like, bad.
Uh-huh.
So in real life, I then went to go stay with my friend and
Approximately a year and a half
year and a
later
half later
ish.
in Ecuador-ish, yes. And it wasn't like I arrived and I looked around her house and I was like, I know this place, right? Like it's not that tight of sort of like
Resolution.
exactly.
Hmm.
However, so one night I ended up staying with her, I think, for 2 or 3 months. So one night after I'd been with her for about a month, we started to have a conversation. And she made a comment and like had asked me a question. And it's funny because I don't remember what the question was anymore, even though this was sort of like this big moment. She asked me this question. And then I had this moment, right? This moment of knowing. And I was like, I know this. In my dream, I responded to her and I responded in this way. And like her response to me caught me off guard. And that sort of started this whole process of this fight. And then I end up out in the dark in the road, like in the middle of the night. And so I'm sitting there, right? This is fast. I'm like, oh, I know this. She asked this question. I try in my life to do my best to like answer authentically to people. I think that's important. I want to show up and I want to establish real relationships. But she asked this question. I was like, I'm not actually going to respond with what I really think because I don't want to set off this chain of events that leads to me being in this physically unsafe experience. And so I shifted what I said, and we ended up having sort of like a kind of tense conversation, but not to the degree. And I just ended up feeling that like I had to leave right then in the middle of the
Mhm.
night. And I remember sort of being there and watching the dialogue play out in real time and being like, oh, there was this fork, and I was given this opportunity to look a little bit down the path of one of these forks. So to with like enough foreknowledge to then be like, I will not be choosing that one. I'm choosing the other fork in the road. Or maybe not, it might not just be a fork, but another fork in the road.
Yes, yeah, it's great. I mean, it's amazing. Would you say that that has happened often
How
in dream?
often?
How often, or do you make a different choice sometimes, or sometimes do you have dreams where maybe the choice that happened in the dream resulted in, I don't know, you sitting with your friends having a delicious meal, and so you're just like, I'll just do the same choice because that was pretty good.
Yeah, great question. I also want to say it's not always as dramatic as like now I'm in the woods alone in the night surrounded by dogs. Like
You're telling the best story.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I keep bringing up the dogs because like when I was living there the week before when this happened, like a dog had killed a baby in the night. So the dogs were threatening, right? So this was
Yeah.
real. But generally,
They're
right, it's
not golden doodles like we've got over here.
exactly right. They're not specially bred golden doodles that like sleep in your bed with you. These are like partially starved dogs
Yeah.
that are
There's,
encouraged to protect their physical
yes.
space.
Yeah.
But yes, most of the time it's things that are really benign. Because, oh, we're having dinner now. That's nice. So actually, very rarely am I like, oh, I'm going to remanipulate in a different way, right? And I'm like, oh, I've been here. That's cool. We're just gonna keep on going with it, right? Like, it,
Hmm.
it's very rare that I feel like I'm like, oh, let me make a different choice. In terms of how common it is, it depends. I feel like there's also flows in life too, where, I think there are flows, times when I feel more connected to source or more connected to something greater than I am. And in those times, I feel like it's more likely that I will both have these dreams, but also that I will make those connections in real time to what's happening. And then there are
Hmm.
also times when I'm really disconnected from my body, from myself, and I feel like it
Hmm.
happens less often then. So it's not like twice a month this happens, but I would say probably never more than a couple times a month. That would probably be like
Hmm.
the max amount
Yeah.
that I've experienced.
So I have kind of two questions based on what you said. So one is you mentioned this idea of connection to source, which I certainly feel in my own experience, and as my avatar, I guess, whatever, cultivates that connection, I can sort of feel the quality of experience shifts with that cultivation.
Yeah.
And so the question is, where do you think where is maybe even the wrong word? What is your belief about source or where the information is coming from? And then the second part of that is, and is that somehow related to something you would consider as I don't love the word skill, but like as a skill you could cultivate?
Yeah, great question. I think in some ways I try pretty actively not to define
Hmm.
source tightly.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think for me, it is something larger than me that's sort of like the connective tissue of this realm. It's a little
Hmm.
vague, but that's
No, I agree. Mhm.
yeah. And it's like,
And
it's
other realms, probably.
right, probably too, right? Right, exactly. And it's not in me and it's not in you. It's this like space in between us and sort of this like understanding of ourselves as like individuals. Like it's flowing all around us, it's connective, and it's between us. But
Flowing.
I
So,
yes.
sorry, everybody I talk to uses these same kinds of metaphors. And one I love is it's Bernardo Kastrup's work, but he talks about it as if you think about water flowing, then little whirlpools form. And each of us is a little whirlpool. And source is the flow of everything. And the little whirlpools appear, boop, and reappear, boop,
Yeah.
boop, boop, right? And so it feels similar kind of to, again,
Yeah.
I agree with you on the hesitation around defining, but
Yeah, but I think that as a metaphor for me, I think that accurately captures what I'm trying to say. Like I can identify with that, or I've thought about before sort of like is this giant ball, and inside is the great infinite creative. And it is this like ever moving, colorful, sort of like blobby
mhm,
thing with like images coming up. And I am a tiny speck on sort of like the circumference or the shell of this great infinite creative. And I am important because I am a tiny speck on the shell of this great infinite creative, but I am also a tiny speck on the shell of this great infinite creative, as are we all. And actually, what's connecting us through it is sort of this like blobby, bubbling, colorful, creative experience in the middle. And like again, like that I would also say for me is metaphor as well. Like I'm not
mhm.
saying there's a giant ball, right? Like
Well, yeah,
this is metaphor and like a way for me to
yeah.
try to understand what I mean without pushing it too tightly, which is also
Mhm.
why I feel like it's important for me to my own self to be like, this is metaphor as well.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what about the idea of the cultivation of the skill? You were kind of speaking to that earlier of it's exhausting, and I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you've thought about that or consider it worthwhile in some way, particularly in the context of what is happening on this planet right now. It feels like everyone feels this shift sort of. And so, yeah, maybe 10 years ago, cultivating your skills of precognitive dreaming was somehow less valuable than it would be now, or I don't know, in 20 years when we get to the beach.
It's such a good question. I think a few things. One, I'm gonna give a plug for meditation. Meditation is really important to me. It has absolutely changed my life. It's changed the way I show up with others. It changed the way I relate to myself. It is a tool that I use multiple times a day. Like
Mhm.
sometimes it's a deep-seated practice, for a longer period of time. And sometimes it's 10 seconds before I get on a call, closing my eyes, turning inward, coming back into my breath, and just sort of pulling in like my energetic source together and also pushing it out at the same time. So I think for me, I'm a big believer in meditation for a lot of things, both for cultivation of connection to self, for me, cultivating connection to source, and also cultivating the type of person I want to be and the way that I show up to those around me. So it's both on the spiritual level, but also on this really practical, like, I'm going into a work meeting. Let me do this practice for a minute because we're just people sitting around a table together. Um, do I think it's more important to cultivate now than at a different time? I don't actually. I think this goes a little bit to me of like the elusive nature of time and this idea that we're on a
Mhm.
progress to get somewhere. And so now is different than before, but maybe it's not, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think what's important is for each of us to continually follow our own journeys and sort of continue to desire and to work towards growing, but not necessarily working towards getting somewhere. I think, it's like,
Mhm.
I don't want to be the same being in 20 years that I am now because then what have I done with my time? How has my
Mhm.
life touched me? How have I paid attention and lived a conscious life? But I'm also not really trying to get anywhere either, right? Like,
Yeah.
but I think, right, like change and evolution are such a deep part of humanity and to me, what it means to be the best of humans. And it's just part of our reality. So I want to
Mhm.
continue to move with that. And like, if I go back to that metaphor of the great infinite creative and like the inside is this constant changing, like colorful, goopy thing, it's yeah, that's what life is. It's like this constant changing, like colorful, goopy thing. And so I must also be in that as well and
Yeah.
lean into the change.
Yeah, into the messiness.
Yeah,
It's funny
absolutely.
you so beautifully said, and I just can't resist telling an anecdote.
Sure.
I was I was on a rafting trip, I think last year, and a friend of a friend was talking to me, and they said, you're strange because you're really like a leader, but you don't know where you're going. You're like, come on, everybody, this way. And people are like, where are we going? And you're like, I don't know. So it reminded me
Love
what you
that.
were describing about, I do want things to be different. I agree with you.
Yeah,
In 20 years, I also want to be different, but I don't pretend to know
yeah,
where I'm going or how I'm going to get there or whatever. And I really appreciate the plug for meditation as a way to cultivate both noetic capacities, but also presence in daily life and less emotional reactivity and all of that because it's just nice to have someone telling my students that who's not me.
I will give many plugs for meditation. It has truly been life changing. And I guess to share on that on a really practical level, I used to do community organizing work in New Orleans, and I got really, really burnt out doing it. I was not meditating at the time, and it was hard for me to understand when I was nearing my boundaries to necessarily tap into what was needed for the group, and also right, we talked about rest and restoration at the beginning, but like, to refeed myself, right, to nourish my own self. So I got super burnt out. I thought that was going to be my life work, and I ended up leaving because I was in my early 20s. I had terrible acid reflux. I wasn't like sleeping, like it was just physically I was experiencing these really extreme case of burnout. And I feel like meditation really brought me back into my own body and this experience and like the understanding of the state I am in and whether I am available at that moment to give or to not. And I think that that has been a really great tool as well. So more practical side of meditation. But
Yes,
I'm a big fan.
super, super important. Well, thank you so much.
Come.
This has been such a treat and just makes my heart go.
Mine too, Annie.
Thank you so much, Ilana. And I want to close by reminding everybody about the study that was referenced a couple episodes ago of the percent of meditators that are experiencing clairvoyance and telepathy. So remember, they interviewed over 1,000 meditators, all the way from beginner to advanced, and 30% of them reported experiencing clairvoyance and or telepathy frequently. So not just one time, but frequently. And also to say, for those who maybe aren't super familiar with the terms we're using here, that we are using precognition and clairvoyance interchangeably to refer to any information that is known ahead of time. So seeing the future is often the idea behind clairvoyance or precognition, but essentially accessing non-local information that, according to our scientific understanding, would be considered impossible, aka real magic. And I wanted to repeat some of Ilana's important words here in the end, saying, I don't want to be the same in 20 years that I am now, because then what have I done with my time? How has my life touched me? How have I paid attention and lived a conscious life? And so while you're out there this week living your conscious lives, maybe ask your friends if they've ever had a dream that's come true. Let me know in the comments what you find out, and I will see you next time. From my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in to something else entirely.